You want to know what the road can do to a man? I'm not talking about the backaches, the blown tires, or the DOT inspectors with a chip on their shoulder. I'm talking about what it does to your head. You spend enough time out there, alone in the cab, with nothing but the rumble of the Cummins engine and the white lines hypnotizing you, you start to see things. Most of it is just fatigue. Heat shimmer off the asphalt that looks like a lake, shadows that play tricks on you at 3 in the morning. But what I saw on I-10, just outside El Paso, that wasn't a trick of the light. I was on a long haul, pulling a reefer full of prime California beef, destination Texas. 40,000 pounds of frozen meat behind me, 1,000 miles of road ahead. It was a good run, a clean, straight shot. But it's lonely. God, it's lonely. Especially that stretch. Once you're past the city limits, the world just falls away. It's you, the rig, and the vast, empty Chihuahuan desert. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, and the sky. Well, I've seen 1,000 sunsets on that highway, but I've never seen one like this. It wasn't red or orange. It was this deep, impossible shade of purple, like a fresh bruise. The mountains in the distance were just black silhouettes against it. It was so quiet, so still. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath. I had some old Waylon Jennings playing low on the radio, the kind of music that fits the scenery. I was settled in for the night, feeling that familiar road trance starting to take over. My mind was just empty. That's when I saw the figure. At first, he was just a speck on the shoulder, far ahead in the twilight. You see hitchhikers sometimes, but they're rare these days. And they've always got a pack, or at least a sign. This was just a man walking. As I closed the distance, the details started to sharpen, and the first little alarm bell went off in my head. He wasn't dressed for the desert, not for a hot day bleeding into a cool night. He was wearing a suit. A dark, old-fashioned suit and a hat, the kind my grandfather used to wear. No car in sight, no breakdown, no flickering hazard lights. Just him, walking along the gravel shoulder like he was on his way to a Sunday church service in 1950. I slowed down a little, curiosity getting the better of me. The last rays of light were catching the dust my tires kicked up. He didn't turn or signal. He just kept walking. As my headlights finally swept over him, he stopped and looked up at my cab. And that's when I saw it. His face. It was pale in the wash of my high beams, but that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the grin. It was the whitest, most unnatural smile I have ever seen on a human face. It wasn't a happy grin. It wasn't friendly. It stretched his mouth from ear to ear, a perfect fixed crescent, showing too many teeth. His eyes were just dark holes above that terrible smile. I felt a jolt, like I'd touched a live wire. I blinked, a hard, long blink to clear my vision, and when I opened my eyes, he was gone. The shoulder was empty. There was nothing but sand and scrub brush under that deep purple sky. For a long moment, I just stared at my mirrors, at the empty road behind me, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird.
My first thought, I'm losing it. Too many hours, not enough sleep. It's the highway hypnosis, the desert playing games with a tired mind. I've heard stories from other drivers, guys seeing ghost lights, hearing phantom broadcasts on the CB. Your brain, desperate for stimulus out here in the big empty, just makes stuff up. I took a deep breath, the cold AC blasting my face and tightened my grip on the wheel. It was a hallucination. It had to be. A man in a suit can't just vanish into thin air. I killed the radio. The silence in the cab was suddenly deafening, filled only by the thrum of the engine and the high-pitched hum of the reefer unit behind me, keeping the meat cold. That sound usually comforted me. It's the sound of money being made. But now it sounded like a low, steady moan. I tried to focus, check the gauges, temperature, oil pressure, fuel. All good. My logbook was up to date. I was a professional. I wasn't some rookie getting spooked by shadows. I drove for another 10, maybe 15 miles. The purple in the sky faded to a dark, inky navy, and the first star started to prick holes in the darkness. I felt myself slowly relax. My heart rate returned to normal. See, just a moment of madness, a heat-addled brain firing off a weird signal. I even managed a small laugh at myself. A grinning man in a suit. Right. What next? A chorus line of dancing cacti? I was starting to think about pulling over at the next truck stop for a cup of burnt coffee and a slice of pie when my headlights picked up another figure on the shoulder ahead. My stomach dropped. It felt like the cab of the truck had fallen 100 feet. It was him. I knew it instantly. Same posture, same deliberate walk. But this time, he was walking the other way. He was walking towards El Paso, back the way I'd come. My mind scrambled for a rational explanation. Maybe he had a partner, a twin. Maybe the first time I was so tired I got the direction wrong. But I knew that wasn't true. I knew which way he was walking. I kept my speed steady this time. I wasn't going to slow down. My eyes were glued to him. He was about 20 yards ahead, on the opposite side of the highway. As my rig roared past, he didn't even flinch at the wind and the noise. He just turned his head, smooth and slow, to track my cab as it passed. And that grin, it was the same one, a slash of white in the darkness, utterly devoid of humanity. It felt like it was plastered on, a permanent feature of his face. He watched me go by, and I watched him in my side mirror, that awful smile seeming to glow in the red of my taillights until he was swallowed by the darkness again. I didn't blink this time, and he didn't vanish. He just receded into the night, a single horrifying point of wrongness in the vast dark desert.
Now the feeling was different. The first time was confusion. The second was a deep, creeping unease. But the third time? That was the start of real, cold-blooded fear. After the second sighting, I did what any trucker worth his salt does when things get weird. I got on the CB. I flicked the switch, the static crackling to life. Breaker 1919. Any eastbound driver on the 10 past the hills. I waited. Nothing but hiss. "Come on, good buddies," I said, my voice a little tight. "Anybody out there seeing a fella on foot? A fella in a suit?" The only reply was a burst of static that sounded almost like laughter. It made the hairs on my arms stand up. I was alone out here. Truly, utterly alone with whatever this was. My mind raced, trying to build a cage of logic around it. It's a prank. It has to be. Some local kids with a mannequin, moving it up and down the road to mess with truckers. It's a dumb and dangerous prank, but it makes more sense than the alternative. But how were they moving it so fast? And in the dark? And why? What kind of thrill do you get from that? I must have driven another 20 miles, my eyes scanning the shoulder of the road so intense that my head started to ache. Every rock, every twisted yucca plant looked like a human silhouette in the dark. The paranoia was setting in. The cab of my truck, usually my kingdom, my safe space, was starting to feel like a cage. The darkness outside the windows wasn't just empty space anymore. It was watching me. And then I saw him again, on my side of the road, this time walking towards me, back the way I came. The pattern was now undeniable. He was always walking in the opposite direction. It was like we were two celestial bodies locked in some bizarre repeating orbit on this lonely stretch of asphalt. This time, I didn't take my foot off the gas. If it was a man, he'd jump. If it was a mannequin, I'd hit it and deal with the paperwork later. My hands were slick with sweat on the steering wheel. I braced myself. I was getting closer, 100 yards, 50. My headlights lit him up like a stage performer. The suit looked older this time, I swear it, more rumpled with a thin layer of dust covering the shoulders. He just kept walking, straight towards my grill. At the very last second, he stepped smoothly off the pavement and onto the gravel shoulder, letting me pass. I turned my head, looking straight at him through my side window as I thundered past. We were maybe 10 feet apart. Our eyes met. Or they should have. But his eyes weren't looking at my truck. They were looking at me, straight into my soul. And that grin, oh God, that grin, it seemed to have grown wider, stretching his pallid skin so tight it looked like it might split. There was an intelligence behind it now, a mockery. It wasn't just a fixed expression anymore, it was personal. He knew I was scared, and he was enjoying it.
That's when the fear turned into something closer to panic. A cold, quiet panic that settles deep in your gut. I was being hunted. Or not hunted, toyed with, like a cat with a mouse. The sheer impossibility of it was what was breaking my brain. This wasn't just weird, it was wrong. It violated the basic rules of how the world is supposed to work. People don't teleport up and down a highway just to smile at you in the dark. I pressed my foot down. The Cummins engine groaned in protest as I pushed the rig past the speed I was comfortable with. The whole cabin vibrated. The reefer unit behind me cycled on again, its drone rising in pitch, sounding for all the world like a person wailing in the distance. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to just get out of there, to put as much distance as possible between me and that thing. My hand darted out and I flicked on the radio again, spinning the dial through the AM stations. I just wanted to hear a human voice, a weather report, a late-night preacher, a baseball game, anything. All I got was static. A thick, wet-sounding static that filled the cab and scraped at my nerves. Through the static, I thought I could hear whispers, fragments of words, but I couldn't make them out. It was probably just my own mind projecting onto the noise, but it felt like the desert itself was talking, and it wasn't saying anything good. I was staring so hard into the darkness ahead that my vision started to swim. My world had shrunk to the yellow cone of my headlights and the horrifying possibility of what might appear in them next. And of course, it did. The fourth time. Further down the road, maybe another 30 minutes had passed. He was on the other side of the interstate again, walking west. But he was closer to the road this time, his shoes almost on the white line. This time, as I approached, a wave of absolute cold washed over me. Not the chill from the AC. This was a deep, internal cold, like I had swallowed a block of ice. I gripped the wheel, my knuckles white, and just stared. He didn't turn his head this time. He just kept his face pointed forward, but I could feel his gaze on me, boring into the side of my head. That impossible painted-on smile was the only thing that seemed real in the whole world. As I drew level with him, a burst of static exploded from the CB radio so loud I flinched. It was a single sharp shriek, and then silence. In that same instant, all the lights on my dashboard flickered once and went dim for a second, then flared back to life. It was a half-second of pure electronic chaos. My heart hammered in my chest. It felt like he'd reached out and touched my truck, that whatever energy he was made of had momentarily shorted out my reality. And through it all, he just kept walking and grinning. I didn't try to rationalize it anymore. The prank theory was gone. The hallucination theory was gone. All that was left was the bone-deep certainty that I was in the presence of something that did not belong in this world, and it was waiting for me. Each appearance was a countdown, a station on a dark, unholy pilgrimage that I was being forced to witness. What was it counting down to? I didn't want to find out. The rest of the world had ceased to exist. There were no other cars, not a single pair of headlights heading west, not one set of taillights ahead of me going east. It was as if this whole stretch of I-10 had been cleared out just for us, for me, and him. The air in the cab grew heavy and thick, and I could smell something I couldn't place. It was like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with something else, something old, like dust from a tomb. I drove on, my eyes wide, waiting. The fear had curdled into a strange, grim resignation. All right, I thought, let's see it. Let's get this over with. The road stretched out, a black ribbon under a moonless, star-dusted sky. The fifth time was the last time, and it was the worst. He was standing, not walking, just standing in the middle of the gravel shoulder on my side of the road, facing my truck as I approached. He was waiting for me. I saw him from a long way off, a perfectly still black silhouette. As I got closer, the terrible familiarity of him was almost a comfort. At least I knew what to expect, or so I thought. I kept my speed, determined not to show any more fear, though my insides were not of ice. My high beams hit him, and he was just as I'd seen him before. The pale face, the dark suit, the horrifying grin. But as my cab got to within 50 feet of him, he did something different. He slowly, deliberately raised his hand to his hat. He hooked 2 fingers under the brim and gave it a small, polite tip, a gesture of acknowledgement, a gentleman's greeting. And as he did, his grin widened. I swear on my life, I saw it stretch. It moved. It grew wider than any human mouth could, the corners of it pulling back a full, joyful, predatory smile. It was the single most monstrous thing I have ever witnessed. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't even scream. I just stared, paralyzed, as I roared past him. I risked a glance in my passenger side mirror. He was still standing there, his head turned, watching me go. His hand was back at his side. The grin was back to its normal, inhuman width. And then he was gone, lost to the darkness. I drove for 2 more hours, my entire body trembling, but I didn't see him again. The sun began to rise over Texas, chasing the shadows away. But it couldn't chase him out of my head.
Pulling into the meatpacking depot on the outskirts of Fort Worth was like coming up for air after being held underwater. The sun was up, bright and warm. The sounds of a busy morning, other rigs backing up, the hiss of air brakes, men shouting, the clang of metal, were the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was normal. It was real. The night I had just driven through felt like a fever dream, something that couldn't possibly exist in this noisy, sun-bleached world. I was running on adrenaline and stale coffee, my hands still shaky as I signed the intake papers. I felt 100 years old. All I wanted was to get this trailer unhooked, find a cheap motel, and sleep for a week. The foreman, a guy named Hank, came out to meet me. Hank was a lifer. He was old and weathered, with a face like a road map of every back road in Texas. He'd seen it all, or so I thought. He clapped me on the shoulder. "Rough night, son? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to laugh it off, but it came out as a weak croak. "Something like that, Hank, something like that." I decided to just ask. Maybe he'd call me crazy. At this point, I didn't care. I needed to know if I was. "Hey, Hank," I said, trying to sound casual. "You ever hear any stories about this part of the country? Any weird local legends?" He squinted at me. "Everywhere's got stories. What'd you see? The Marfalites? A chupacabra?" "No," I said, my voice dropping lower. "It was a man, on I-10, back in the desert, dressed in an old suit, walking on the shoulder." Hank's easygoing expression didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker, a shudder coming down. He stopped checking his clipboard and looked me straight in the eye. "He have anything with him?" Hank asked, his voice flat. "No, nothing. No car, no bag, just him." I hesitated. Then I had to say it. And he had this grin on his face, this huge, crazy grin. That was it. That was the magic word. Hank's face went slack. The leathery tan seemed to pale a few shades. He physically took a half step back from me and slowly shook his head. But it wasn't a gesture of disbelief. It was a gesture of dread. He looked past me, out towards the highway, like he was afraid he might see something there, even now in the broad daylight. His eyes told me everything. He knew exactly who I was talking about. He looked back at me, his gaze heavy, filled with a kind of pity. He said, "Listen to me. You get your rig unloaded, you go get your sleep, and you forget what you saw." He paused, swallowing hard. "You get me? Some things on that road, you just gotta let them go." He turned to walk away, but I grabbed his arm. "Hank, who was he? What was he?" He stopped and looked down at my hand on his sleeve, then back up at my face. His own was grim, lined with a fear that was decades old. He said, "That's not a man you see. That's a warning." A warning. The word just hung there in the humid Texas air. Hank pulled his arm free, clapped me on the back once, a hard, final pat, and walked away without another word. He wouldn't look at me again. The message was clear. this conversation was over. I felt hollowed out. Hank's fear was the final, terrifying piece of validation. I wasn't crazy. What I had seen was real enough for another man, a tough old foreman, to be terrified of it. A warning of what, though? That I was too tired? That I should find a new job? Was my reefer about to fail? Was I going to have a blowout? I got my trailer unhooked and found the grimiest motel I could, the kind that smells of stale cigarettes and regret. I fell into bed, fully clothed, and closed my eyes, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw him. The suit, the pale skin, and that grin splitting his face, tipping his hat to me in the headlights. The image was burned onto the inside of my eyelids. My phone rang around noon. The vibration on the cheap motel nightstand sounded like an earthquake. It was my sister. Her voice was frantic. I sat bolt upright, my heart suddenly racing for a whole new reason. "He's okay," she said, before I could even get a word out. "He's okay, but it was bad." "Who's okay? What happened?" I asked, my mouth dry. "Dad," she said, her voice cracking. "He had a heart attack, a massive one, last night. The doctors said it was a miracle he made it through the night. He collapsed right around 10 o'clock. I dropped the phone. 10 o'clock. I looked at my logbook, my hands shaking. 10 o'clock, Mountain Time. That was just after sunset. That was when I first saw him. The purple sky, the grin that sliced through the twilight, the warning. It wasn't about a flat tire. It wasn't about my truck. It was for me. It was a message delivered by the cruelest postman in the world. My dad pulled through. He's still with us, albeit with a new collection of pills and a pacemaker. I never told him what I saw that night. I never told anyone, except a few other drivers, late at night when the stories get weird. Most of them think I'm lying or crazy. But a few get that same look in their eye that Hank had. The look of someone who knows some roads are better left untraveled after dark. I still drive. It's the only thing I know how to do. But I never take that route anymore. I'll add a day to my trip and go 1,000 miles out of my way to avoid I-10 between El Paso and Van Horn. Because I know he's still out there, walking the shoulder, wearing that old suit. He's not a ghost. Ghosts are memories of people. He's something else. A signpost, a border guard between the world we know and the one we're not supposed to see. And all I can think is, a warning lets you know that something terrible is coming, but it doesn't do a damn thing to stop it. It just makes you watch the road waiting for it to appear. And all the while, somewhere in the desert darkness, the grinning man is out there just waiting to smile at the next poor soul who needs to be told that his world is about to fall apart.